Well, a big welcome to all of you to our final Electronic University Roundtable discussion for the year. My name is Matt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm out here in Los Angeles, Southern California area, originally Tongva land, actually many other community tribes, but where we are was Tongva land. Thank you for joining us today, whatever time of day it is. Now, my community has blessed a few folks who felt called to venture out from our Catholic worker to Mustard Seed Community Farm in Ames, Iowa. But I can't pretend to know the unique dimensions of life in a Catholic worker farm or in a different Catholic worker space. But I do know that anyone who has read any of Peter Morin's dreams knows that we cannot talk about the fullness of the vision of the Catholic worker movement without talking about cultivation, without talking about farming communities or the Green Revolution. When we asked each of you all what additional sessions you wanted for this limited electronic university series, we received countless notes saying that no matter what we picked, there had to be one session dedicated to the worker farms. So this is the fruit of our wisdom and in a way different from the work of many urban communities. You know, Peter saw tending to the earth as a sacred act on sacred space. So these folks who will share with us today will share about the unique classroom space that is the farm to discover and uncover some of the deepest truths of some of our shared Catholic worker tenets: simple living, nonviolence, resistance, anarchism, community, so many more. And at this time, as our earth pleads for a return to right relationship, we today get to hear the wisdom of these land lovers, workers who became scholars and scholars who became workers. And so though I imagine time exists in a different way out on Anathoth community and St. Isidore Farms, we're going to invite each of these communities to share about 10 minutes from their wisdom and insights, and then to take us into breakout rooms so that we can think about what this means for our work and in our communities. So please join me in welcoming Eric as he shares about Peter Morin and how the St. Isidore Farm is working to bring Peter's vision up to date, before we hear from Mike, who will then share about regenerative farming, climate change, and what they're doing at Anathoth Community Farm. So Eric, please take us away.
Thanks, Matt. It's an honor to be with you all. Let me just get a quick glass of water here. Yeah, thanks. I'm glad that you all have been doing these online universities. Unfortunately, this is the first one I've been part of. So I've heard good things and glad to be part of this ongoing work around clarification of thought. So I just want to greet you from this portion of the southwest corner of Wisconsin. We are in the unglaciated driftless bioregion on the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk, Sauk, Meskwaki, and Iowa nations. We're on 25 acres here, community of 6 folks, including 2 children. We've often had others living with us at various times. This community is a little over 5 years old. Been in the Catholic worker now for close to 2 decades, started out as doing urban hospitality at St. Jude Catholic Worker in Champaign, Illinois, and then have been at New Hope Catholic Worker Farm in St. Isidore for the past 13, 14 years or so. I guess I have a few different just thoughts to share with you all to maybe stir some conversation. And I've been thinking during the pandemic, especially about Peter's idea of the Green Revolution. And what that means, and knowing that the Green Revolution for Peter Morin wasn't, of course, the sort of Norman Borlaug assault on the land that we know of from the 20th century, but his hearkening back to the Irish 7th century monks and villagers, green equated with the Irish. And his idea, and the Green Revolution encompasses all of the Catholic worker movement. That encompasses the roundtable discussions, the houses of hospitality, and the farming communes. That's where Peter drew his inspiration from. And his inspiration was likening our time to the collapse of the Roman Empire. That we're going to need these places of refuge as the capitalist disorder continues to fall away, and we're going to need havens and refuges, oases, islands of light. And I was thinking about farms a little bit this morning and remembering Stanley Wisniewski, who wrote a little book that's hard to find, Wings of the Dawn, a history of the Catholic worker movement. And Stanley was a great humorist and has just a really nice little book, History of the Movement. And he says, early on in that book, he says the creation of the new society within the shell of the old was inaugurated in June 1935. So not May 1933, but June 1935. What happened in June 1935 was the founding of the Garden Commune on Staten Island, was really the beginning of their push towards the land. They felt like by starting to engage the land that they were finally getting at the heart of Peter's vision. Of course, the history of Catholic worker farms, especially early on, are fairly disastrous. You can read Kate Hennessy's book for some just particularly horrible stories about early Catholic worker farms, about a woman pulling up in Easton and offering a few cigarettes to some guys who then load the entirety of all the food that they've saved from the season, and she drives away with all their food. Or the fact that the Easton farm actually devolved into a literal cult, not in the Peter Maurin sense, but in the modern sense of a creepy cult. And so for years, Catholic worker farms have been kind of a joke within the movement, but now they're gradually being taken more seriously. There's more interest than ever, I think, in Catholic worker farms. There's probably about 24 Catholic worker farms. And I think the genius of Peter Maurin was calling, this movement not an organization, but an organism, one that would grow, change shape according to the needs of the world. And today, one of the huge needs of the world is, with climate change and climate catastrophe. And, as Catholic workers, we're always meant to be tending to those who are most on the margins, those who are most vulnerable. And as Pope Francis talks about in Laudato Si, the earth herself is among our most abandoned and maltreated of all of our poor. In terms of climate change, though, that the climate discussion can be overwhelming. What I found to be more readily accessible in terms of climate is not in terms of just saying this big monolithic thing that there's climate change, but there's a myriad of various crises that, topsoil loss, habitat destruction, wildlife destruction, insects destruction, all of these various crises that in our own small ways, and, Dorothy Day always came back to the little way, we're nothing grand here, trying to reverse course on climate change by engaging the land in different ways. And also in Pope Francis's encyclical, he talks about ecological conversion. And I think the ecological crisis is as much a spiritual crisis as anything, that we've lost our way in Western society. We've lost our understanding of who we are within creation. And so I think part of my understanding in engaging with the land day in, day out is hearing the call from our indigenous brothers and sisters to engage the natural world in a sense of kinship, to understand that the land is all our relatives. And this is echoed in St. Francis, of course, brother sun, sister moon. This sense of kinship with the land is a kind of spiritual, it's like I'm trying to work on changing my consciousness around how I understand the land that I'm living within. And a few years ago, actually, a friend of ours was put together a Stations of the Cross, and used the phrase Sister Earth. and the bishop wanted to vet this, and he said, you can't use the phrase Sister Earth. And then they sent back the quote from Laudato Si that came from. He's like, okay, yeah, you can keep that. So, you know, our tradition is kind of coming to that this is one of the paths out. So on our farm, we're trying to engage in that sort of kind of spiritual discipline. We're also trying to construct an alternative. We're doing, you know, small scale agriculture, sustainable agriculture, no-till gardens. We are doing rotational and even a little bit of mob grazing of late, Mike, but Mike will go into that. Flock of hens, planting oaks. Doug Tallamy, the great naturalist, says if you're going to do one thing at all, no matter how big or small your yard is, plant an oak tree. It's just hugely important species. Doing some small scale prairie restoration, composting toilets, solar panels, heating and cooking with wood. So we're trying to construct an alternative, but also in recognition that as we engage the land, we have to engage the history of what's happened on the land. And about 7 years ago, during a Growing Roots Agronomic University workshop that we put on at New Hope Catholic Worker Farm, we had the our 5-day workshop was called Back to the Land ? At the end of the week, we said yes, but one of the readings that we engaged that week was Jennifer Harvey, who's a theologian and historian out of Des Moines, who wrote about why creation care movements have to take on reparations, and 7 reasons why creation care movements aren't going to be fully effective without engaging the reparations question. So we've been, for the last 7 years, engaged in this question of what does it mean to be engaging land in an intentional way, given the history and legacy of Indigenous dispossession, Black oppression. What does this mean for us? And we don't have the answers, but we continue to carry that question with us. And so we feel like the spiritual discipline of understanding kinship, and maybe Matt could mute whoever is buzzing around. So constructing an alternative on the land, and then that third point of engaging BIPOC liberation movements in whatever way we can. And so we've been just trying to show up. Like line 3, Brenna, my spouse, has spent many weeks, was engaged in the valve turner action, shutting down the pipeline, explicitly around solidarity with the Anishinaabe folks who are engaged in the struggle there. Took out Students to Standing Rock. We've been doing a ton of education locally around the history of colonization on in this region and more widely. We've been inspired by real rent and honor land tax movements that have surfaced mainly on the coasts, where people are offering reparations funds back to whoever's land they're on. So we've been trying to work with the Ho-Chunk with very mixed success on possibilities around that. Brenna has been almost full-time the last several months, been working on the boarding school accountability and healing question, which is just so important to be dealing with as the Catholic Church. We're trying to support food sovereignty projects that are Indigenous led, like the Meskwaki Food Sovereignty Initiative in Iowa, the Dream of Wild Health, which is an Indigenous led land project around Minneapolis. I actually was just recently invited to be a part of Nuns and Nuns, is a group that's launching a land justice project and looking at reparations with religious communities. So this is kind of like the threefold vision that I'm seeing right now is, how do we spiritually engage the land in a way that's healing? How do we build a constructive possibility on the land for an alternative to capitalism and ecocide? And then how do we find a way to support and be in solidarity with Indigenous, especially Indigenous, but also Black-led movements of liberation. I mean, not far from us, there's a woman who's created a 40 acres and a mule project up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, who's a Black woman who is looking for support to purchase land to reinvigorate Black foodways. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities out there, and we are just super imperfect and full of compromises, but this is the way we're kind of seeing it right now. And I will leave it at that and turn it over to Mike, this great elder who I'm excited to hear from and have been inspired by. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to jump in and try to do 50 years of a journey from there to here in 10 minutes, and do it in a way that makes some sense and gives us something to talk about. Barb Cass is also on the screen. She's going to jump into the breakout rooms, so you can talk with her. She just deferred to me because this is really all what I do, and it's all in my head, and I'm so glad to be here. And that this is a topic that we're taking up. Okay, so quick. Barb and I kind of got involved in the worker when we were at Jonah House. In 1980, we moved in right after the Plowshares 8, and started cutting our teeth on what it meant to be involved in that group of people. And we knew that we wanted to be on a farm because it was in my background. This is a picture of my great-grandparents in Germany who were industrial farmers. And this young lady here is my grandmother who had a farm in Michigan. And all I've ever wanted to do was be a farmer. It was monstrously important to me. And when we started Anathoth Community Farm, it was really to be a land-based resistance community. And that's what we did for the first, first 2/3 of our being here, was launching out from here, doing all kinds of direct action against war and nuclearism and a lot of different environmental things. And then a few years ago, I read Omnivore's Dilemma and became familiar with Joel Salatin and the regenerative movement. And I completely changed my focus, because in my mind, with the makeup I am, with my farm background, I know that we could have nuclear war at any time. But that would be an accident, and it would be be unfortunate. But climate change is happening, and it is going to happen. And so I decided that I needed to jump in, and I started looking at our land and thinking, yeah, I could do this sort of thing, this regenerative agriculture thing. And so I came up with my version of sacramental agriculture when Jake Olson and Frank and I went out to speak at Harvard at a conference that they had on agriculture and faith. And what I came up with was that if the most rudimentary definition of a sacrament is a visible expression of an invisible grace, then sacramental agriculture is learning how to feed ourselves by utilizing living organisms as closely as we can to the divine intent for all created species. So take that in for a second. And basically what that means, I think, is we have no idea where we fit in the circle of life as human beings. We have to learn where our place in the world. The graphic that you're seeing there right now is these different kind of living organisms and the amount of gigatons per carbon they are on planet Earth at any given time. You can see that most of what's on the planet is plants. Surprisingly, next to plants, there's more bacteria by gigatons of carbon than anything else. If you look way over here, you look at animals down here. Very few of us on this planet are actually animals. And if you look at humans, we are very insignificant. You know, it's amazing that God wants anything to do with us in terms of managing the planet, because we are barely here. So when I started trying to understand all of this, I came up with what am I going to do? What am I going to do to manage my farm with biomimicry? And what biomimicry is basically utilizing plants and animals in the way that they give the most expression to themselves as plants and animals, and looking at the way things were before humans got in the way and mismanaged everything and wrecked everything because we put cities in the way, roads in the way, industry in the way, and plants and animals were no longer able to relate to each other in a proper way. So yeah, we started doing biomimicry on our farm, and it meant all kinds of different practices with plants and animals. And the biggest thing that we've discovered along the way is that you can draw carbon down by doing proper plant and animal management. The most important animals on every farm, and they're not even animals, the most important creatures on any farm are the animals that are 3 feet under our feet. That's what we target in the farming that we do in all of our management. Is we look at our steers and our chickens and our pigs as being soil engineers, and their job is, in the management that we do with them, they are to improve soil health and the life of the plants that are underground. Because if you do that and you increase the organic matter in soil, you can see for every 1% increase, if we did that on all the cropland that is in the United States, you could add this much water, the amount of water that flows over Niagara Falls in 150 days. And it's all by doing this thing called biomimicry, mimicking nature, the way that plants and animals interacted before humans got in the way. Yeah, so that. And one of the things that was so word I'm looking for. Well, so important in learning how to do this kind of management was that hold it. Where am I? I'm looking here. When you do this kind of management of animals and plants, you not only improve soil health, but you're producing the best food that there is to eat. One of the things that was very surprising to Barb and I as we got into older age and and started in on Medicare, is we discovered that we actually live 160% under federal poverty guidelines, which is pretty poor. But on our farm, we've become almost self-sufficient in the food that we raise, our housing, our energy needs. And we discovered that there's no way that we can live in voluntary poverty because we're so connected to the land and management of the nature that we have inherited here, that we have created all this wealth. And it's almost astonishing how much wealth we've created just by learning how to be on the land, that we can't even be poor anymore. Everybody who lives on the farm has realized that we can't even afford to live anywhere else but here. It's kind of surprising. Another part of doing the kind of management that we do that's a little counterintuitive, and this is, if you're familiar with Drawdown, Paul Hawken, if you're doing any kind of climate anything, you need to have this book or go to their website. One of the things we discovered on our farm here, that like if you look down at number 9, these are 80 different types of management practices you can do for getting carbon out of the air. Some of the best ones are what we're doing on our farm here. Silvopasture here is number 9 out of 80. Regenerative agriculture is number 11 out of 80. And when you start doing these kind of practices, you discover that animals are not the enemies. There's so many people who think, particularly cows are killing the planet. They're not killing the planet. They are like the most incredible creatures that humans have to relate to. Out of 5,000 species of mammal on the planet, only 200 are ruminants. And the reason that humans hooked up with ruminants very early on is they are the best machine for turning plants into meat, milk, fiber, and labor. Because they are the only animals on the planet that can turn cellulose into themselves and the work that they do. So if you think that you're doing a good job of eating carbon friendly by moving away from meat, yeah, move away from industrial meat, but start taking a closer look at regenerative practices and how they put carbon in the soil and produce some of the best food that people can possibly eat. I think I'm going to stop there and let us break out, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Eric. We'll have a chance to thank you more formally at the end, but I'm going to put into the chat our breakout room question, but invite folks to also take, if something spoke to you, run with it. Don't feel obliged to just focus on this, but we're going to ask, where do you see the intersections of the wisdom of worker farms with the work you do in your communities? Or another way, how might you incorporate some of the ideas, the wisdom expressed today in your works? So I'm going to send you to breakout rooms. You'll be in groups of 4 or 5. You'll be there for 30 minutes. So please make sure to share the space with everyone there. And when we come back, we're going to be doing a share back. So if someone in each of the rooms will be responsible for capturing the big ideas so we can share them out, that would be wonderful. All right, I will send folks out, and anyone who just joined, I will make sure you get a room. So yeah, thank you all for diving into that. We have 7 groups, so invite each group to take 2 to 3 minutes to share back some thoughts, some ideas, and we'll start with room 1, which was Barb, Eric, Kevin, and Lynn.
Yes, so I'm sharing for group 1. And I think my biggest takeaway was the way that specific circumstances around each location and farm and the people that work there create both limitations and new opportunities. And that could be as simple as like the weather, like if the climate, is it snowing right now or is it warm? Can you, like, the growing season, the slope of the land, personal commitments as well, like how are we engaging with the community, and how does that affect your relation with the land? So it was really interesting because I'm just getting into the Catholic worker myself, and the 3 others in my group were much more involved for longer times, and just hearing their unique perspectives and stories while all on the same thread of the Catholic worker and the farm and the getting back to the land. So the same thread was there, but I was really taken away by the unique storylines within each.
Thank you. Anyone else from that group? Any other thoughts that feel important to name? All right. Room 2, Isaiah, Leah, and Lincoln.
Yeah, so they asked me to be the spokesperson for our group, and we had about 3 minutes at the end where we came to consensus on 6 points that we wanted to share with everyone. So the first point is just the practical difficulties for urban hospitality houses to have a real relationship to the land. Lincoln gave this funny example of rats and compost, how it's almost impossible even just to do composting just on a small scale because of rats in urban settings. And just sort of the paradox of this ideal of these healthy relationships to land, and then what we are really able to do in urban hospitality settings. The second idea that we talked about is the importance of what Peter Moran called philosophy of labor, or E.F. Schumacher called humanization of work. So I mentioned a recently released book, Small Farm Future, which talks about just the type of changes in agriculture and the food system that need to happen. And the author, who's a British farmer and sociologist, says in the future, by 2050, we'll need 1 out of 10 people full-time working in food production, and that the main barrier to that is actually people's attitudes towards manual labor and work. So on the one hand, perhaps that's like a contribution the Catholic worker can make to prepare for the small farm future, which is emphasizing philosophy of labor. On the other hand, we want to be aware of the complexity of that message, right? McDonald's is not work that Peter Moran would like very much, and we should be really attentive to how we talk or communicate that. The third idea was just creating better ties between hospitality houses and farms. That seems to exist well in the Midwest, but maybe not all parts of the US and Catholic worker communities. So perhaps urban hospitality houses where there isn't local Catholic worker farms could be really intentional about building relationships with farms outside the Catholic worker, but that practice agroecology or regenerative agriculture. The fourth idea was the reality of limits. Like running a hospitality house is pretty intense stuff, and there's not a lot of extra margins in individual or community. So how do we deal with the reality of limits when we're thinking about integrating the reality of farming and this ideal of farming communes into our work? And I'll just mention one last thing, not to take up too much time. Land prices and resistance. Globally, United States, Canada, all around the world, land prices are skyrocketed. Land that may have been affordable for communities to purchase maybe in the late 1980s, early 1990s is now worth millions of dollars. So is it perhaps sort of an area of resistance economically to these high prices, and what would that look like? So.
Thank you, room 2. Appreciate all of that. Room 3, Chrissy, Dan, Harry, Joanne, and Kara.
So I volunteered to be a reporter, and now I'm feeling extremely nervous, but here goes. Yeah, Joanne's cheering me on. So we talked about how the farms and other ecological knowledge we've gained from our time around the farms, how we want to carry that forward into our lives and help it change the things we do. We also talked about the sort of fake divide between like how we see ourselves as urbanites or as rural people, when in fact the whole web of human interaction is also based upon on sustainability and having those food connections. And then finally, we talked about bees and local honey.
Leave us hanging with us what that meant, but I love it. Thank you. Room 4, Carla, Joseph, Lydia, Mark, Theo.
Yeah, we talked about a whole lot of things. There's a whole lot of things to say about this big topic. Folks expressed interest in like the talk earlier of like the spiritual potential of, you know, reconnecting to the land and whatnot, and how much land is required to do that. Can we do that in like the small space in our hospitality house? Do we need a larger space? How do we, you know, everyone I think in our group was coming from a more urban area, and so like when we have community gardening projects or farming projects, how do we connect those to the communities around us and stuff like that, folks who don't have access to food? And that can be complicated, we talked about, when you're dealing with folks like who has access to the garden space, and like balancing the work people put in and making it accessible to everyone. We talked a little bit about like the idea of how do we get normal people interested in this stuff, you know, not just us Catholic workers who are already interested in talking about it, but how do we reach out to those? And somebody said we should make sure to mention, we talked some about like maybe the potential of getting them young, getting children involved and getting their hands in the dirt, and the value in doing that too. So yeah, that's group 4.
Thank you all. Group 5, we have Alice, Lakia, and Martha.
Hi, I'm Lakaya. No, it's okay. So I guess to preface this, I got to listen a lot to Martha and Alice share because I'm not really a part of the Catholic Workers movement yet. Eric invited me to this webinar after I'd reached out, so I'm looking to join and start participating in this work more. But just some things that I kind of heard and stood out from our conversation. Both Alice and Martha shared some of like what has sustained them in this work for so long, which I had asked them to because they both had been involved for a long time. And so kind of just the different relationships that they both had from the land. We talked a little bit about that idea of everything being a sacrament and the ways that creation can be a sacrament for us, and like just that's like a sustaining thing, that even when the work is hard and changing and in this moment right now of the climate catastrophe and the even more constantly changing nature of the work, that being with the land and the community that they both have experienced has been like a sustaining thing. And those things resonated with me a lot too. And so just that whatever the work looks like, every small thing has value, and that it's a good place to be right now, even though it's hard and there's just a lot involved in it at this time.
All right, our last 2 groups, group 6, Brian and Maria, the small group.
Yeah, well, conveniently, somehow Zoom managed to group the 2 groups, the 2 people together. So we also have Carly Ann and Betsy, of course. We talked about this being a time of rising capitalism and the rising difficulty of living under capitalism until capitalism fails, and how farming is a way to create refuges in that systemic crisis that we're in, and making gardens a space that offers care. We also talked about the differences between the importance of data, as Mike Miles shared, and intuition, and the intersection of aging and the need for support, and also the way that farms are supporting our aging Catholic worker friends. As Betsy said beautifully, our pension is in the soil and the plantings. So seeking support while also knowing that there's so much richness in that experience. And then Brian kind of rounded that out with a reminder that even though we're living this rich life and all of that, and we've been doing this for so long, that there's still so much to learn. Our skills are knowing where to go for skills, or practicing these skills, having not done them our whole lives, as many Catholic workers come to this not as young people, or as kind of older young people, that we're still learning even into our older years of farming. And then I kind of layered in kind of this idea of climate catastrophe, and how I see our urban farms as a needed resource as inflation and climate make food more and more expensive and more difficult to access. And our experiments and practicing is a way for us to at least get people used to the idea that food can come from somewhere else, even if we're not at a scale where we can provide. And then we had a long, wide-ranging conversation that departed from all of that and went into like how Catholic worker farming has changed, and how it's become a more legitimate and central part of the movement, and how grateful we are for that, and our hopes that we will continue to share work and space and expertise going forward. And so, yeah, we had a great conversation. Anything else, Carly-Ann?
No, it was great.
Thank you all. And lastly, room 7 screens Amanda, Mike, and Willa.
All right, I can say a minute's worth about our conversation, which was super lovely. So I'm Amanda D'Aloisio. I'm at the New York City Catholic Worker, and there was Willa and then Mike. So in terms of place, you had the very, very opposite ends of the spectrum, which was kind of interesting to see if there was sort of common ideas that we could come to. Personally, I was super psyched to be in a group. Well, one, I love Willa, so anytime I get to see her is joy. But with Mike, is then I got to ask him all the questions I had about his presentation. So selfishly, that was fantastic. And so we talked a little bit more about what sacramental agriculture means, and just the way that they do farming on their land. So I was super interested that both logistically and also philosophically how they think about that. And then I kind of wondered if I was a little bit challenged by this idea that we were supposed to think in terms of like possible commonalities or themes that urban and rural and different communities could come together on. And I kind of wondered out loud whether or not stewardship, even though it looks really different in these different places, whether that can be an ideal in which we can come together. We talked a little bit about ways that city folk try and connect with the land. Willa's family is vegan. We talked a little bit about community gardens in Baltimore and in New York. And then obviously also the real sort of, not quite, the dangers and drawbacks of city community gardens in terms of arsenic and lead and things like that are just part of city life that contaminate the soil. So soil was kind of a big part of our conversation. And then I think that a theme that emerged was that we all figure out various ways to work with our neighbors and serve our neighbors, whether they be urban or rural, sort of finding commonalities between our neighbors and how to sort of move forward and find connection. But Willa and Mike, if there's anything else.
Beautiful. Well, we've got a couple minutes, so I'd love to open up the floor if anyone had any things that they felt were missing, or things to take us home with.
I want to say something, and I'm hoping this is not just like a shameless plug for our farm. But so partly it is. It's just that I think that every year we are looking for community members who are people who are looking to just learn for a season, or people who would like to be part of our community for longer. But also I think I do think there's an opportunity, and this is what I said also last year when I spoke, but yeah, that I think that the farmers, that there's so much to learn. There's so much skill in farming. There's so much skill in growing food. I think the people on the farms, we all have so much more to learn, but I think that we do have things to teach to some of the folks in the cities. And I guess I just sometimes dream about, I do a lot of teaching, and it would be, and sometimes it's exhausting, but it's really fun to have Catholic workers come and join our community, because I think that they also have a lot of experience to share with us and a lot of strength to bring. But I do think that the farms could offer a lot to the folks in the city houses, whether they wanted to come for a short time to learn from us. So I guess just to kind of think about some of that, I think we're really lucky in the Midwest because we do really cooperate with each other a lot. I think we gather a couple times a year, the farms and the city houses. And I just think that just like this session we're having right now, I just think that that's really valuable. And I guess I want to let people know that those opportunities are there.
I think I would love to be able to do that. I wonder if, some of us who are I'm in California, that's pretty far flung and expensive to try to some extent. So I feel like one of the challenges is how to create a little more integration, even if we're going to be geographically, not able to be in the same place. Like how we can be engaging these questions together. Because I do feel like this is the one thing that has always made me feel guilty in the movement, is that this huge aspect was not something that was a part of my daily, and that it was hard to integrate. And so I feel like there's, this partnering and finding also ways to be of mutual support is really important to me. And I'm grateful for this conversation, as it's raised some interesting possibilities for me. Thank you.
I remember when, I don't know how many years ago it was, Tommy Cornell came to Catholic Worker at Mary House and did a Friday night meeting about farming. And I was in the, how many years ago was that? And I was in the audience, and we started talking, and I was like I said, my roots are in farming, but so many Black farmers got, whatever you want to call it, whatever word you want to call it, from farming, that some people don't know that if you'd go back to, if you'd ask young people today if their people came from farming, they would be like, no. But in all actuality, the chances are probably
Is Carla frozen?
feel like.
Go ahead.
Am I frozen? Oh, I thought I was frozen. I didn't mean to be frozen. But anybody who has a chance, no matter where you are, to go to some soil in the ground, put your hands on it, and just leave your hands on it and see what it does to you. It will change you. And the more chances you get to put your hands on the dirt, the more you will be changed. Even if you're not growing anything. Better if you're growing something, But even if you're not growing something, to feel the connection that you have to this earth. It's in all of us. Some of us just don't remember that it's in us.
Any last thoughts before we wind down?
I just want to say thanks to Matt for organizing all of these electronic universities. You did a really amazing job, sir, and thank you.
Wow.
Yay.
Many hands made this happen. Joanne, Rosalie, Lincoln, Theo, Lydia, Brian, Kateri, Harry, Alice, so many others. So thank you all for helping make it happen. I'm going to drop into the chat right now a survey that you can either tell us what you liked, but you didn't like, so that if we do another round at some point next year, we can learn and grow. Or if you're really excited about these possible things, maybe you can help us make them happen the next time around. So let us know in the brief. It's a really short survey, so that we can get a group of folks who might want to make it happen, if that's what we feel the Spirit calling us to. I did want to shamelessly plug, if anyone is particularly interested in keeping the virtual space alive, the LA Catholic Worker is partnering with some folks here, with a variety of folks of faith, to challenge our Archdiocese celebration of the California mission system, believing that we have a job to organize, support, and prepare Catholics for accountable action. We have a couple of series of events happening virtually over the next 6 months. So if anyone's interested in learning more, feel free to go to the link I dropped in the chat. And again, lastly, big thank you to all of you for making this happen, to all the presenters who shared their wisdom and experience, Eric and Mike tonight, and all those beforehand. We really have so much of what we need within our movement, but let us continue to build bridges elsewhere and within. So thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for this work. And just as a reminder, these sessions have been not just a place for intellectual exercise, but really questions and ideas that are meant to trickle into our work and our lives and our movement, so that we can grow and continue to bear fruit. So thanks for those who will find ways to incorporate this into our work, so we can do this even better moving forward. But thanks everyone. Have a lovely, lovely Sunday, and we'll see you when we see you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to see everybody.